Hovering outside of that, we're gonna be going.
Good morning. If anyone, well, obviously you wouldn't know this, but we're not going to live stream this morning. So if you could post that in Discord for any interns that might not have joined Zoom, they're not going to find the live stream. So we'll just be on Zoom this morning. With that introduction, I'll bring it to the table. So what is it that you saw? What is it that you want to talk about? The soup Nazi.
I thought Kramer's friendship with the Suganthi was so interesting to me. That these two people were being like odd, eccentric, and outsiders that found this camaraderie, I guess.
Yeah, so certainly the soup Nazi hits it off most with Kramer. Actually, in this, at least in the beginning of this episode, you're wondering whether or not it's reciprocal, but it is. It turns out that there's actual dialogue. I'm not really sure if the medical literature is consistent with what we see. If we think that both may be cluster A personalities, there's a lot of individuality, but I've never seen on a shelf exam a question written where this would happen. So I'm not so sure this is reliable. Nonetheless, it happens. It does allow us to just review those cluster A personalities. In all three cases, these personality disorders do adhere to a single cardinal trait. So the paranoid personality disorder is the individual or the condition in which the individual have a pervasive distrust and suspiciousness, say that early in the morning on a Friday, of others. And then as evidenced by, and there's multiple criteria for which I think the individual would need 4. Schizoid personality, individual is both physically and emotionally isolated and prefers that level of psychological or emotional distance. And then that's also a quality of the schizotypal personality, but the additional quality of some bizarre eccentricity of behavior that does not reach the level of psychosis or a breach in reality testing. Because if they do, then they have a psychotic disorder. So those are the 3 cluster A's. Those are the 3 cardinal features defining the cluster A. And I think both the soup Nazi as well as Kramer probably portray both or portray some condition within that cluster. Anything else you saw from either the soup Nazi or Kramer?
I thought it was interesting in one of their conversations. Kramer's like, you expect so much of yourself, and then he responds like, yeah, so it makes sense that I would expect a lot of my customers, right? And you kind of see that play out in the beginning when customers are ordering, and there's this expectation like stay in line, move the right way, like don't ask for bread. So it makes sense to the soup Nazi. It's like, yes, I hold myself to a high level. Why shouldn't everyone else be held to the same standard that I hold myself to? Which is extremely unrealistic, especially if you're running a business.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that quality is consistent with the obsessive compulsive personality, right? Which doesn't cluster with paranoid, schizoid, or schizotypal, but is in a different cluster C itself. So just refocusing on cluster C, you have the individual who is a perfectionist, who has that attention to detail, the micromanager, the type A personality disorder. That's your obsessive compulsive personality. Then you have your dependent personality disorder in that same cluster, the individual who needs constant affirmation of their every next step. And then the dependent person, excuse me, that's the dependent. And then the avoidant personality, the individual who, again, avoids other people, places, and even things like thoughts or feelings, right? So that's the avoidant personality disorder. What's the difference between avoidant and schizoid? Because the first sentence on your shelf question is going to be the same one, right? Question 1, question 21, one single best answer, avoidant, the other one, schizoid personality, because both will present with avoidance behavior, being emotionally distant from others. Right? What's the difference?
I think avoidant, the patient wants social interaction, whereas schizoid, I'm not exactly sure, but
You're exactly right. That doesn't want it.
okay.
Prefers to be isolated. Yeah. Yeah, so in this case, again, just focusing on your shelf exam, the individual with the avoidant personality is more likely to be a self-referral, right? Because they want to be out there, but they just feel too awkward. And they realize, if I don't put myself out there, I can't get hurt. And it's true. They don't put themselves out there and they wake up the next morning and there's no injury. So that gets reinforced, right? Negative reinforcement. And negative reinforcement would be the psycho part of biopsychosocial factors that perpetuate and have this behavior continued. Having said that, avoidant personality is one of 4 personality disorders that do tend to improve with age, right? What are the other 3? Borderline personality, in the 40s, individuals usually have an improvement in interpersonal relationships with borderline personality. Some people call it borderline burnout, but whatever we call it, yeah, it's actually supported in the medical literature. 2 more.
Narcissistic.
And then,
Dependent personality. 1 more.
Histrionic.
Nope, getting closer. Yeah, antisocial personality disorder is the other one. Yeah, antisocial, borderline, dependent, avoidant are the 4 that tend to improve with age. So with and continuing the discussion on the avoidant personality disorder, the individual who's conflicted, wants to be out there but doesn't feel as though that they belong out there or are too socially awkward to interact with folks. Over time, they're going to be made to interact with folks, right? Whether it's because you have to go and move on campus, whether it's because you have to get a job, whatever it is. And you have a sense of flooding, right? So it's certainly not, it may or may not be something that is in correspondence with a therapist. It could happen naturally. And over time, people do tend to have their avoidant traits improve. Questions about cluster A, cluster C personality disorders?
So I feel like avoidant could really look like social anxiety.
Yeah.
Personality disorder, I mean, I guess it's gotta be more integral into it, but do you have any like pearls for myself?
Duration. So always remember, start out recalling the qualities that are required to call it a personality disorder in general. All right. Number 1, these are traits that are enduring over time. That is not the case for social anxiety disorder, right? Social anxiety disorder can develop from a premorbid baseline, right? Personality is personality. Personality disorder is a disordered personality, stable, enduring. Number 2, it's pervasive. That's a biggie, right? So what happens in social situations, it also happens outside of social situations, right? So, and that's where you get to thoughts and feelings. Okay, so those 2 are very helpful. And hopefully we'll be somewhere in that clinical vignette that gets you to choose or skip A, social anxiety or social anxiety disorder, and something like C or D, which would be avoidant personality. Any other?
yeah, I was thinking that you'll probably see it like throughout the lifetime, you wasn't diagnosed as a child, and then there'd probably be people being closer with like family and then other people, not just with friends in social situations. It could like potentially cause some anxiety, and you could feel anxiety because you have a personality disorder, like a hereditary personality disorder.
Yeah, and there's a high comorbidity too, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will not be captured on your, I mean, that's just like a confounder on your shelf. But I don't think, yeah, I don't think, there's a lot of us sadists out there writing these test questions, but we're not that bad. What other characters you'd like to discuss this morning?
I'm talking about Elaine, because she was just like so insistent and pushy about getting her way this episode, and like basically taking her suit not to down. Like, there's no peace to be had with her.
What in the world is going on here? And again, the clinical scenario we have to paint for ourselves is that this occurs and somehow connects to her ending up on your couch as a therapist, right? As a self-referral, right? So what are we going to discuss with Elaine? What are we going to tell Elaine?
Feel confused, kind of making the situation all about like her and like what she wanted to do and like her way was right, she wanted to do what someone else wanted to do. So very self-centered focus.
And we talk about personality traits, and the answer is yes. In previous episodes throughout the entire 9-season franchise, that's pervasive. It's always about Elaine. So this is not something that came up in this one episode and seems to kind of be an outlier, or this is not who she is. Quite the opposite. So we could begin working there. What else? And here, I think you have to be a little bit of a Seinfeld fan to know some of these details that I think impact our medical decision making here. Well, in a therapist office, you're going to do the intake, you're going to do that wonderful H&P and psychiatric workup, and you're going to have her back. There's going to be follow-up appointments, therapy sessions. What is something that you are bound to investigate and ask about? Oh, come on, really?
Family relationship.
Absolutely. More specific. And
What's
Doc,
your mom
Doc,
do to
yeah,
you?
exactly. I was going to say, Doc, I don't want to talk about family. I don't have any SIBs. I was like, I'm not talking about your SIBs. Let's talk about your parents, right?
I also for her father especially, right? Because it was like a man that she's fighting with, and she had like the like roles and authority, right?
And the great news is that Mr. Venice, is it Alton Venice, is in at least 2 episodes, and he is not a kind man. Right? He is not a kind man. As a matter of fact, she not only talks about, and I'm putting words in her mouth and paraphrasing, she fears him, but in one episode, she doesn't show up for the meeting and leaves Jerry and George to hang out with him at the restaurant. Now, again, there's a reason Larry David writes in, but we have to be suspicious that, public transportation wasn't the cause of it. Right? So she certainly has issues. There's another episode where I don't know if they're talking about religion, and her boyfriend or her new boyfriend says, my parents were from or are blank in terms of ethnicity or what it is. Her answer is, oh, my father's an alcoholic. Right. So again, it might be a joke, but then again, humor might be a defense mechanism to allow her to actually say and admit that my dad's an alcoholic, and therefore I'm an adult child of an alcoholic, something that in addiction medicine is called an ACOA. So a lot of reasons going on here in terms of understanding what's going on with Elaine and her relationship with the soup Nazi. And she wants to take him down, right? She wants to take her father down. Right? This is called displacement. And it's a deep-rooted, that is internal or unconscious wish of her id to take down her dad. Other characters, other scenes, the soup Nazi.
I thought it was interesting when Jerry's like eating the soup right in front of George and just keeps commenting on how good it is, and George is just standing in the corner. He's like, I can't believe you could do this.
It's a microcosm of the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then Jerry, instead of being like, oh, would you like not even realizing that he did something wrong, was like, no, you shouldn't have asked for more. That was your fault. Like, don't bring me down with you. Like, there's almost no remorse. There's no like shared camaraderie in the situation that they're in. It's like everyone's fighting for themselves.
No empathy.
Yeah.
And not only Jerry, but these are 4 people who have no empathy, who are in this traditionally empathetic relationship as what we are literally 4 friends. And that's the whole comedy behind the situational comedy. And this is just one scene that again reminds us that Jerry, as fun as he is, as cool as a friend he would be, lacks empathy. And again, this is not the only scene, this is not the only episode that demonstrates Jerry's lack of empathy. Some people call it narcissism. I would fall short of calling it narcissism. I think in layperson's terms, that's not a problem. Those terms can be interchangeable, but I think in psychology and psychiatry, there's a little bit more detail that we need. These related terms do have some specificity. The lack of empathy is often referred to as egocentrism. I think that fits here. That is perfectly fine to say someone lacks empathy, someone is egocentric. I think that is interchangeable. But where you go from egocentrism to narcissistic personality, is very similar to Kohut. He has those 4 stages of narcissism. So I'm not going to get into any psychological theory this morning, but there's a graded response here.
There's what makes it comedy is a lot of insight, right? Like when they're being serious and things like kinds of people, they don't see it. They think like it's great. They think like it's even like in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there are episodes, quite literally and figuratively, for these core characters in which they do demonstrate insight. But I think that's the outlier. It's not the baseline, right? The baseline is that they all lack profound insight. And then when they have these episodes of insight, these fleeting moments, it's funny. They actually get to stand outside themselves and again make comments. So and that happens, and that parallels real life, both inside and outside of the office. Other thoughts here?
How George got upset about Jerry's girlfriend, and despite being very upset, wouldn't really talk to Jerry about it directly, but
What was George upset about?
making like, well, kissing in front of him and then giving I don't know what the word is, so I say like baby names, that's not what I mean, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Kind of keeps the relationship carrying.
Little atypical for you. I mean, for us, those of us that know Jerry, it's a little atypical of him. So I think on the surface, that's where this begins. That George is his high school buddy, right? So they've known each other the longest, right? Elaine dates Jerry after high school, and then Kramer's the newest, having moved into the Jerry's apartment right across the hall. So the initial dyad is going to be George and Jerry, and it's just a little bit atypical for. I don't really see him interacting with other girlfriends in the situational comedy over those 9 seasons in a similar way. Maybe some come close, but it definitely puts George off. And then in certain situations where we see similar things happen, obviously outside episodes, different episodes with George, that's not him, right? Even when he's engaged, and some of the things that Susan wants to do, and the way she acts and the way she talks, that's not George. So and George is going to call Jerry on this. Not really sure where Jerry is or where his mind is with this. It's hard to put a finger. Do you have any?
So they like reference a conflict the two of them are having, and it does seem like very pointed at George, and so I think a part of it, because George is engaged in this episode already, I think there's like some competition between the two of them of like George is really on with his life and Jerry isn't. And I think that's where that comes from, whether or not he's aware of that, and whether or not it's intentional. The way the episode ends makes it seem like it was intentional, right? Because he basically tricks George into giving Susan that name. And then Susan was like all into it, and George can't change it now. And then they break, and then Jerry and Attorney Case break up. So the episode makes it seem like it was intentional, but I do think it stems from a conflict between the two of them instead of any actual feeling on Jerry's part. He even leaves her at the student honesty place. He was like, I don't know her, and it was quickly able to win her back. So it doesn't seem like he was really interested in Sheila. It seems like he was trying to get the point with George.
Yeah, it's a good point. And remind me, was there a conversation with Sheila or about Sheila that these two were going to change their lifestyle and become serious at their particular age when it comes to interpersonal relationships?
They mentioned a handshake. It was something happened in a previous episode.
was, okay.
And
Yeah, it
so
was.
we don't actually know what the handshake was about. But George said, you reneged.
Yeah.
So it's really on you.
And that's exactly what the handshake was about.
Okay.
So they're talking at Monk's,
Mhm.
and they realize as part of the midlife crisis type of scenario, we can't continue to live like this. Who are we? We're children. Boys do mature. We have not. We've got to change things, and both are on the same page here. They meet 2 women, and they realize this is it. Like, well, I'm going to stop finding a reason not to fall in love and do the mature thing. And George then asks Susan to marry him. Jerry realizes, no, not going to do it. And that's the renege. And that's going to be a constant source of conflict between these 2 lifelong friends.
Right, because they're kind of codependent in a lot of ways. And so George being engaged in that way, I think is very threatening to Jerry. But
Mhm. And not only Jerry, there's again, outside episode, different episode, but even Elaine goes to a spiritual advisor and says, you know, my friend's a loser and he's going on with his life. What does that make me? And the spiritual advisor during like this podcast, like says it, like I met with someone, but for anonymity reasons, we'll call her Elaine. And she confided in me that her loser friend, we'll call him George. And like George is hearing this, like, what? Why would you say that? And by the way, when that happens, I'm almost sure, I'd have to double check this though, but he turns to Jerry and yells at him, we had a deal. So yeah, and this goes over a few episodes that that engagement. All right, we're just 3 minutes away from calling this. So any final observations? Well, good. All right, so we're gonna log off here, log right back on the other Zoom link and begin table rounds. Thank you.